Now in this video I wanted to talk about using displacement maps in a very different way to achieve an interesting text effect. And what we're going to be using is an actual photo of a texture to create this. And here I have, it's just a texture, a really close-up texture of an elephant skin. You can see it's got a very rough, very scattered nature about it. And we're going to use this as our displacement map. So what I want to do is actually, so we know that it's going to be contained within the image that we're working on. I'm just going to drag and drop this into my working file here. And we'll just kind of position this in play right about here. I'm going to go ahead and close this document because I no longer need it. Now I want to remove the color information from this layer because it's going to be a displacement map and the color is really doesn't matter. It really looks at the light and dark areas of it. So I'm going to press Shift-Command-U and that's going to remove the color information. You can also do that by going to the image menu to Adjustment or to Desaturate right there at the bottom. So I've done that. I'm going to go into this File menu and go to Save As. And we're going to save this to the desktop. I'm just going to call it Displace. You can certainly give it any name you like. Just make sure you name it something you remember. Saving it to the desktop. And we need to save it as a Photoshop document, but I'm going to click on As a Copy and uncheck Layers. What it's going to do is basically make a copy of the image, flatten it, and then save it as my displacement map all in one step. But it's going to save me having to do all those steps manually by doing this. So click Save. Here on my desktop you can see that there's the displace, and now I'm still working on the layered file. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this layer, and let's grab our text tool and go ahead and set a text layer. And we're going to do, let's do the word grind. I'm going to scale that up. Now my text is, of course, the same color as my background, so we can give it a color. Let's give it a kind of an orange color there. There we go. So I've got the word set. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and center it or into the middle of the document. I'm going to press Command and Control A to select all, and then just hit my center horizontal there and vertical. So it's sitting in the center of my document. We'll go ahead and create a new blank layer above that one. I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool, and we want to get a relatively small hard edge round brush here, and we want to make sure that we're painting with the same orange or whatever color you've got the text filled with. And by all means, try different colors. You don't have to exactly use the same color I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the pressure setting here, and let's go ahead and go back in here. What I want to do, now we do want to make sure that you're working on the blank layer, is I'm just going to put some scattered elements around the lettering here. So I'm just going to kind of just brush and just kind of click my mouse just randomly, and maybe dragging a few elements here and there. Just random elements like that. It doesn't have to be a lot, but don't do too little either. So again, this is going to be a very random thing, so you may end up doing this effect and having to reapply the displacement map after you've painted them, because you may need to make more or less depending on as you go. So there's our scattered elements. It's on its own layer. With that selected, we're going to go into the filter menu, go to Distort, and go to Displace. And we're going to use a really large number for the displacement here. You can see I've got this set to a horizontal scale of 50 and a vertical scale of 50. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Let's click OK. It's going to ask me to find the displacement file that I want to use. And of course we want to use the one we just created, which is right here, Displace, and there's that texture. And when I click Open, watch what happens. Gives me an interesting kind of texture effect. And you can kind of see that elephant skin in there. It's got a very subtle texture to it, but given in the context of this text effect, it's kind of a cool grunge look to it. And that's simply using that displacement. Let's do a couple more things to this. I'm going to load this layer as a selection, but first thing I'm going to do is actually change the layer order here. I'm going to bring that effect underneath the actual text. And then I'm going to load this layer as a selection. I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and click right on that layer icon, and you can see it loads it as an active selection. Zoom in here. I'm going to select the text layer itself. Now we're going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click to add a new layer mask right here, and you'll notice what happens. You don't see much of a change. If I turn off the texture layer here, though, you can see that it has masked away parts of the lettering where we had that selection. Well, so we can see it a little bit better, I'm going to go back on this text layer, double click on it to open up the layer styles, or you can go into the layer style, choose Drop Shadow. And notice what it's given me. It's given me kind of an interesting kind of depth there. So I'm going to set the opacity a little bit higher, and the distance I'm going to leave alone, but I am going to bring the size down to about 3 just to make that a little bit finer of a shadow. And I could be done here, but I'm going to go ahead and add a quick bevel and emboss on this just to give it a little bit more texture in there. And let's modify that a little bit. Inside the bevel and emboss, I'm going to take the size down to about 3 and increase that depth considerably. Just like that. I'm going to uncheck Use Global Light, and I'm just going to grab this target in here in the angle and just move it closer to the center so the light is kind of more above the graphic, as you can see right there. Let's increase that depth a little bit more. And I'm going to actually drop that size down to 2 as well. So that's giving me a very interesting kind of grungy grind effect. So you can turn off that beveling if you want. If you want to keep it that, kind of sharp edge grindiness, go ahead and have the bevel on and off. But that's pretty much it. The point here is using that displacement map, looking at textures. I used something very unusual. I used an elephant skin texture. And that's one of the things you got to do is you got to look at different types of textures. If you've got a digital camera, you shoot the texture of a sidewalk or a brick wall. That can always contribute to these displacements and creating very interesting grunge effects like this. And just to see a final product, if I actually took this and put it together on a little poster here, you can see that same effect's going on, and it just adds to that effect, giving it an overall interesting look. And notice over here, it's still editable text. If I double-click on it and highlight that. So even though it's seemingly complex text effect, I can still change the text itself on what it says without having to go back and start at the beginning.